The service accommodation sector is a little bit like the Wild West. There's very few rules in place in terms of what you can and can't do, meaning that anybody can pretty much set up and operate in this area. However, all that is about to change. The government has been looking very closely at this sector and now looking at how not only can control but shut down aspects of this business. Hey, if you're watching my videos for the first time, my name is Saj Hussain, and on this channel I share with you my 15 plus years of property investing experience to ultimately help you get further faster in your own property investing business. The service accommodation sector goes by many different names. Some people also refer to it as the Airbnb model or holiday lettings, short stay, short-term rental. It goes by all these different names, but ultimately the objective is where somebody's seeking accommodation, staying in accommodation for a short period of time, which is not necessarily their primary home, to ultimately provide a roof on their head whilst they're away from home. Very similar to like when you would be using a hotel. However, one of the biggest challenges in this sector of service accommodation is that it doesn't really fall under any clear regulation. And this is where the government has been paying close attention in terms of what's going on. The UK government's Tourism Recovery Plan, published in June 21, included a commitment to consider a possible tourist accommodation registration scheme in England. Now, what they stated was the purpose of this to call for evidence to gather information that will improve the government's understanding of the benefits and challenges of short-term lets across England as a whole, and how they vary across the country. This evidence will help them determine whether there are options the UK government should pursue through a consultation. They're keen to consider alternatives to registration licensing schemes, including non-regulatory alternatives. Now, since that government's consultation paper, the UK PM Sunak has pledged commitment to short-term let registration scheme. He has said that the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove was fully behind the plans to deliver a new tourist accommodation registration scheme. This would enable governments to better understand and monitor the impact of short-term lets on local communities. He's also confirmed that the government is planning to consult on whether specific planning permissions should be required for new holiday let properties in popular tourist destinations across the country. Now, I'm of the opinion that something does need to happen in this sector because it's a little bit crazy out there. There needs to be some standards, some minimum health and safety that needs to be put into place in order to be able to protect the guests that stay at these properties, but also the business as a whole as well. Airbnb is probably the biggest platform in the world, which is a portal for providing this type of accommodation for those that are looking for it and also for those that are marketing as well. Now, it's had a view on what the government has been saying recently. In essence, Airbnb also supports some kind of regulation in the sector. Essentially, it's saying that the data captured by a register could enable the local authorities to be able to identify and take action against bad actors, inform of future planning and taxation decisions around local housing. And the data could also help local authorities better understand tourism infrastructure needs and to really inform future campaigns and support bids for major events. And it believes that a registration process will not only provide crucial insights of policymakers and authorities, but also enable families to continue to share their homes, something that's particularly relevant as householders battle with one of the biggest financial crises for more than a decade. Airbnb goes on to say that the growth of short-term let activity has also generated substantial direct and indirect financial benefits for the UK tourism sector, as well as playing a vital role in its continued recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. A report conducted with Bigger Economics estimates that travel on Airbnb generated £1.8 billion for England's economy in 2021, supporting over 65,000 jobs. In England, the short-term rental sector is unregulated except in London, where there's a 90-day rule, meaning that you can't provide short-term accommodation for more than 90 days within any one calendar year. This was introduced via an amendment to the Greater London Council General Powers Act 1973 under the Deregulation Act 2015. The concept of short-term letting is not new. It's actually been around for quite some time with people doing guest stays, home swaps, holiday lettings, etc. However, the growth has really come from the online travel agents that have appeared, such as your Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia and TripAdvisor. To give you some context, Airbnb launched in 2000 and in 2011 actually opened an office in London. By 2021, it had reached 1 billion guests using its platform. Although it services the traditional market of hotels, bed and breakfasts, self-catering apartments, it's also created a new model where people are looking to capitalize on providing accommodation on a short-term basis, hence the birth of the service accommodation business model. The All-Party Parliamentary Group for Tourism, Leisure and Hospitality published a report in the sharing economy in July 2018, citing figures that the sharing economy businesses in the accommodation sector generated £3 billion in sales during 2015 and that this level of revenue could rise to nearly £30 billion by 2025. As an example, Airbnb's own UK Insights report in 2018 showed that between July 2017 and July 2018, hosts and guests using Airbnb contributed to £3.5 billion to the UK economy, catering for 8.4 million inbound guests and earning hosts 854 million. With those kind of staggering numbers, you can see why this has got the attention of the government. Not only that, there's also an issue about not being able to identify where these properties are. So outside of London, for example, where there's some basic regulation around the 90-day rule, there's very little other regulation as mentioned earlier. Now, for example, health and safety, apart from the health and safety executive, there isn't really anybody else that anyone's answering to. Now, with regards to new regulation and what will happen and how the government is going to completely change this sector, we believe there's possibly 4 ways that this might happen. The first will be using a national registration scheme. The UK Short-Term Accommodation Association, the trade association representing the thousands of owners and businesses operating in the sharing economy, has welcomed the government's plan to introduce a registration scheme for short-term holiday lets. The association has made it clear from the start that in order to be successful, the scheme should be simple for owners to register with, straightforward for authorities to administer, and low cost to run. The second way may be that of a licensing scheme, similar to that, for example, of HMOs or in some areas for buy-to-lets as well, where local authorities could elect to introduce a selective licensing scheme, so operators will have to register their properties and they will have to meet certain basic standards. The third method may be via a new planning classification. As it stands, there's no planning classification for the short-term rentals. They currently sit somewhere between a C3 dwelling or a C1 hotel, bed and breakfast, guest house type of property. Some operators have already been issued with planning breach notices from local authorities who have been asked to apply for a change of use to sui generis. This is generally for larger units, 6+ guests, so a planning classification could be created simply just for the short-term rental sector, which means that it actually now has a clear place. The fourth way how this change might come about is through the expansion of the 90-day rule. Now in London, the letting of a residential property for short term usually means it becomes a temporary sleeping accommodation in view of the law. Temporary sleeping accommodation used to refer to sleeping accommodation which is occupied by the same person for less than 90 consecutive nights in return for money, or money's worth because of that person's employment. The law states that in London, a residential property may only be used as temporary sleeping accommodation, i.e. short-term let, if 2 conditions are met. And these are: the total number of nights a property is used as sleeping accommodation must not be more than 90 nights in a calendar year, and at least one of the persons providing the accommodation must be liable to pay council tax at the property where the short-term accommodation is provided. Short-term accommodation providers, including ourselves, have enjoyed a period of no regulation, but all that's about to change. The government has made that absolutely clear. It's really a question of which method is going to be employed to ultimately regulate this sector. I certainly believe it will be a good thing. It'll employ the guest experience that people use. It'll also be an improvement to the health and safety that currently exists in some of these properties as well. And also it means it's a level playing field. That means everyone's playing by the same set of rules. There's a lot of controversy in this sector, so I'd love to know your thoughts on what you think should happen to the service accommodation sector. Just pop in the comment section below and I'll do my very best to answer and address as many of those questions and comments that are raised. And if you've enjoyed this video, then make sure you click on my face over here to subscribe to the channel. And then once you've done that, click on this video over here where I talk about during the pandemic how we really struggled with our service accommodation business and just keeping that alive.